Hi folks, it's Steve. It is the 14th of March 2013, and this is not the first ever online meeting about a book, but it is the first meeting of this sort of book club 2.0 that we've started to help us get through some of the important works in education and education technology that have not been a major part of the conversations. So we're starting with Mindstorms based on a blog post by Audrey Waters, and she of course obviously wasn't the first either, but it did precipitate a chain of events that led to our getting together. So thanks for being here. This has been really fun to think about. I have no idea how it's going to turn out. It would be important for each of you who would like to speak to make sure you run the audio setup wizard. So go up to Tools, Audio, Tools in the main menu, Audio, and run the Setup Wizard, Audio Setup Wizard, or look for the microphone with the star, the red star on it, and that's the Audio Setup Wizard button as well. The Future of Education interview series is a Web 2.0 Labs project. We're doing this sort of under the auspices of that. There are a number of events we're holding this year. We being the community we. The School Leadership Summit is very soon. It's in 2 weeks. It's an all-day free event with some great speakers and activities. SchoolLeadershipSummit.com. ISTE Unplugged is the set of events we do at the ISTE conference, sort of the shadow events, Fringe Festival, starting with an all-day unconference, which we've done for years now, this year being called Hack Education. We have a Worldwide STEM Conference coming up in July, Future of Libraries in October, and Global Education Conference in November, and more to announce. Coming up on the actual interview show, Jay Cross next week on informal learning, Adam Bessie on the Global Ed Reform Movement. Then the week after that is the School Leadership Summit, and then the week following that, Matt Hearn talks to us about deschooling, and John Hattie on visible learning. If you missed any of our shows, they're all recorded in full Blackboard Collaborate versions and in MP3. Edith Harrell Caperton came on 2 nights ago, perfect timing, talked to us about her work in constructionism, her work with Seymour, and Global Laurea, and the projects that she's worked on since. Well worth a listen. Before that, Paul Thomas talked to us about poverty in the U.S. and its impact on education, and that's a really compelling story. Anyway, lots up there, hopefully something of value. So this is where we get to sort of figure out where we reach from. Irina's from Adelaide, where it's 10:30 a.m. I'm actually outside of Auckland, New Zealand right now, and it's 1:03 p.m. And look for the star to the left of the map. Double click on it and then click on the map. It's fun to know the time, the temperature. Since this is a smaller group and because this is a book study, do tell us a little bit about yourself. We'll let you grab the mic fairly quickly and get involved in the conversation, but it's fun to know who's here. So the conference sessions, if you miss any of them, they're all recorded, and they'll also be at the SchoolLeadershipSummit.com site. So I'll put that URL in the chat for you. Oh, so iPad users are, yeah, you don't get this, well, you should be able to see the map. Not the stars. That's interesting. Who's in Hawaii? Hi, Davila. Okay, so let's move on here. There is a Mighty Bell group for these Book 2.0, Book Club 2.0 meetings, and I'll put the link for the space for this one. You've probably visited it if you are here. So the hope is that this becomes a good place for collecting conversation around the themes in the book. maybe we'll use this session to actually kind of springboard into there. There are things I really want to talk about from the book. I'm sure that you do as well. They're not going to fit in an hour, so hopefully we can keep the conversation going there. And part of what I love about that, don't worry about being unprepared. The part of what I love about the Mighty Bell platform, and I do consult for Gina Bianchini, who created Mighty Bell, so there's a tie there. But part of what I love about the platform is that you could create a small group over and over and over again. So if you had a class you wanted to hold a book club for, you could then create a whole new group for another class. But you can also create one that's public and has a long life. So this one I'm hoping is one we'll come back to over the course of time and connect with other people who care about this book and others, because we have a series of other books at bookclub20.com you can go to. So here's how I propose that we work this event. I'm going to put up a blank screen, and I'm going to show you how you can write on that screen. And then I'm hoping that we can list what you feel like are either a major theme of the book or something you would like to discuss from the book. And then the idea would be to springboard from that, maybe do a little bit of voting to figure out what people really want to talk about. And then we're not going to cover everything, but at least have a conversation where we cover something that, one or two or three things that you feel are important, valuable, critical for thinking about today, especially if we're taking a book, you know, from 30 years ago, and how is that applicable? Why is it a book we should be reading today? So here's the blank screen, and to the left of the screen, those same icons that you saw. The second one was the star for putting a star on the map. The fourth one down has a letter A and some lines. At least it does on my default view. And if I click on it, it gives me the option between the letter A with some lines or just the letter A. Select just the letter A, and I'm going to do it right now. I'm going to put major themes, and then I'm going to put things to talk about. And you can type under either of those two categories and indicate something that was a major theme or something you want to talk about. For example, I kind of want to talk about how I think cell phones may actually be the more current device, not cell phones, but mobile devices may actually have more opportunity right now on a broader scale for what Seymour was talking about. But I haven't tested that with anybody, so I'm curious to see how others react to that. And I want to talk about what he means when he says that learning is genetic. Is anybody having trouble figuring out how to type? Oh yeah, so Arbina, put something in the chat and we'll type it in for you. And then, okay, so I'm going to put over in the themes, culture. I put some quotes in the Mighty Bell space about what I think Seymour's conclusions are about change and the degree to which the computer potentially can change culture, and that those learning cultures would have an impact on formal learning. Okay, Arena wants to talk about flipped classroom. Yeah, why so little development has happened. It is not on Kindle. And Constructionism, the book that Adit helped to write, and it was the subject in part of Tuesday night session, is not even available at all unless you're willing to pay $350 for a used copy, at least on Amazon. I'm going to put over here learning models as a major theme, culture, learning models. And I'm really curious as to his vision of change, how change can take place. Because I have this feeling that if Seymour were well and we could talk to him, that that we would be talking about how things after 30 years aren't nearly what he had hoped they might be. Maybe you agree, maybe disagree. Let me know what you think. I haven't read the book, but sounds like this could apply to individualizing learning, need for understanding programming. Is that a major theme or a thing to talk about? I'll put it under, if there's a question mark, I'll put it under things to talk about. Okay. So let's do this. I want to get a sense of what you care about for this discussion. So under the major themes, I'm going to call them A, B, and C. Now, the person who put constructivist learning, did you mean to put constructionist, or are you thinking about the tie between constructivist and constructionist? Yeah, and we can talk about it too. Constructionism. So I'm going to put constructionist learning, culture, learning models, and then there were things to talk about. So let's start with the major themes. So let's do a poll here. I'm going to change the poll to ABC. So you're going to see in the participant box A, B, and letter A is the fourth icon over. And why don't you pick the, okay, I'm going to change that to D now because we have a D. Tools polling. Why don't you pick the topic of the major themes that you would want to talk about most? So constructionist learning, the role of culture in learning, learning models. So like for that I meant the Brazilian Samba school, where and how learning takes place, and then developmentally appropriate. So of those four, constructionist has 2 votes so far. What we'll do is we'll pick one from the major themes, then we'll pick one from, go ahead and click on the, to do the poll you want to click on the icon that has the letter A in the participant window, and then it will give you the choices there, A, B, C, or D. So Mary, Eder, Ibiji, and Vimala, be sure to choose them there in the A, B, C, or D in the participant window. We'll pick one from the major themes, and then we'll pick one from things to talk about, and then we'll see where we go from there. So right now it looks like constructionist learning. So I'm going to highlight that. Okay, and then let's go over here to the things to talk about. So Irina, the poll is in the participant area where the names of each of us are. At the very top, toward the top, you'll see a set of icons. The fourth one has the letter A, and if you choose that, you can pick one of the options there. And it looks like learning models is sort of a second possibility there. Okay, and then let's do things to talk about. What if we can categorize these in any way? Okay, bye, Maria. Okay, so mobile devices, learning is genetic, flipped classroom, why so little development has happened since Papert's book. Tangible versus physical artifacts, how change can take place, learning is physiological, individualized learning, how to create a group, need for understanding programming. Okay, so this is a longer list. Why don't you put in the chat the thing in the things to talk about that you would really want to talk about. We can add that, Peggy, fear of learning. Tell says, so Bob says tangible versus virtual artifacts, flipped classroom for Michelle, mobile devices, nice little development. We've got one of each. Okay, let's start with constructionist learning and go from there. And is there anybody who would like to take the mic and either talk about what you think the definition is or your reaction or response to it in some way? I'm going to let somebody start us off here. So to grab the microphone, I'm giving you all microphone privileges. You just click on the talk button at the top left of your screen, and it will turn your microphone on. So who wants to grab the mic for constructionist learning? Well, I'll start us by talking a little bit about, so Seymour had spent time studying under Piaget, and Piaget had this model, and this is me simplifying, but he had a model of that students or youth or individuals construct their own knowledge. The teacher can't teach, but the student can construct knowledge or understanding. And that was called constructivism. And Seymour's addition here with constructionism was that it's not just the construction of knowledge, but that construction of knowledge takes place within a culture and with, I'm going to say artifacts, but I'm not sure that's the right phrase, but with the tools or the models or the objects in the culture. And so there's an important connection between the tangible world that is lived in and the construction. Anybody want to expand on that or give more information? So to do so, you would just click your microphone on the top left of your screen. Well, so for me, the outcome of thinking of constructionism versus constructivism would be that you would really have to look at the culture around the learning. And I think ultimately my conclusion was that it's the modification of culture more than it is the modification of learning theory or learning environments that will actually change learning. And that that those who are interested in change, and that the opportunity the computer brought was an ability to change the culture. Now, the computer didn't guarantee that the culture would change in positive ways, but it was an opportunity for all of us to create a change. And maybe somebody has a more nuanced way of describing that than I do. So I'm just going to keep going until somebody rescues me by grabbing the mic. So one of the quotes that I wrote down from the book was, significant change in patterns of intellectual development will come about through cultural change. And the most likely bearer of relevant cultural change in the near future is the increasingly pervasive computer presence. Okay, Rhonda, so you can grab the mic. Just click on the talk button at the top left and your mic should turn on.
Hey, Steve.
How are you?
Good. There's a little bit of a lag. My computer is seems to be operating slowly.
The only one making that remark, so maybe it's Blackboard Collaborate today.
I guess what I'm hearing is the difference that you're talking about in terms of constructivism or constructivist learning versus constructionalist learning. I'm referring to Chapter 8, where he talks about the learning, the images that he has of a learning society. So if we're talking in context of creating a learning society, which by Chapter 8's perception is, and my perception of Chapter 8 is that to create a culture of learning to learn. Would that be accurate?
Well, I had the same, Chapter 8 for me was the real meat of that conversation. And I'm not sure I'm qualified either to give a definition of constructionism versus constructivism. I think I may be close. But I did feel like that Seymour came around to, or his conclusion was, that the culture is the critical piece. And I don't know, did he use the phrase of learning how to learn culture? That probably would be appropriate.
Yeah, he's opening the chapter with, or the book that I have, the version, and I just picked it up from the library. He opens the chapter with presenting a particular computer culture, a mathetic one, that is one that helps us not only to learn, but to learn about learning. And for me, that really kind of gave me a very different approach to the book, because and I'm glad that it was referenced at the beginning to start with Chapter 8, because it really does frame the book much better when you start there. And creating a culture, as he's talking about, I'm understanding it to be this how to develop within children or societies an ability to learn about learning. So I love that concept, and then it made sense when he talked about turtle geometry and micro worlds and, you know, programming with a context of children being hands-on and interactive in creating with themselves, using themselves as an object-oriented thinking, if you will, to work through the problems that they encountered. So if they didn't know something, to be able to not teach them the answer by telling them, but ask them to put themselves in the role of what it is that we're trying to solve. And I thought that was a really interesting concept.
So I don't think, Rhonda, help me here, I don't think that Seymour's saying that this can only happen with computers. I think he's saying that this is a moment of significant change where computers have these incredible opportunities to provide, is an incredible platform for providing opportunities across a broad range of topics and means for that kind of learning. But I think what he's saying is it's not necessarily guaranteed the computer is going to do that. We have to use the opportunity of the moment of computer culture, the moment of the computer, to build this into our culture, but it's not necessarily guaranteed. Was that your reading?
Yes. I thought that was very significant as well, that he defines it, or in one of the preface, and I believe it was John Scully, but I could be wrong. One of the statements at the beginning was how he was, he meaning Papert, was so advanced in his thinking of how children could be involved in learning with computers and utilize, or computers could change the way children learned. And Papert opens up the book with trying to dispel any rumors or any resistance to what he was trying to say by saying I'm looking for the quote, but I can't find it right at the moment, but he says something to the effect of, I don't want to I don't want to misrepresent anything. Computers cannot teach children, basically. They're not going to be the things that create a different learning environment for children. They're going to be, as you said, a resource or a tool or an object-oriented platform for them to be able to work through learning and be able to develop thinking and learning skills that they wouldn't normally develop in an instructional type learning. That's my understanding.
So tell me if you think this is fair, and again, please everybody feel free to chime in because we want to move toward a conversation. My conclusion would be that in many ways the computer, and the internet in particular, and the mobile platforms are in fact changing how learning is taking place in our cultures. But I'm not convinced that looking at how we think about formal learning has changed because of those changes in culture. And that would either be an optimistic message of we're still going to see the change, or it could be a pessimistic conclusion that traditional learning structures, even after 30 years, haven't figured out that there's a shift here. Okay, Bob, good, you're rescuing us. Click on the talk button, there you go.
Thanks. I wonder, following up on the school-related piece or formal ed piece, does this loop back into a culture thing of how we see kids, how we see childhood? That so much of school, they're basically raw materials to be processed by a curriculum, and without being able to see kids differently, the likelihood of getting to a model like Papert would be advancing isn't going to happen.
I really like that connection. Rhonda or anyone else, does that resonate with you as well?
Yeah, it certainly does for me, Bob. I agree. And on page 5, just in case anybody does have the book, it says, in many schools today, the phrase computer-aided instruction means making the computer teach the child, and one might say the computer is being used to program the child. In his vision, in Papert's vision, the child programs the computer, and in doing so both acquires a sense of mastery over a piece of the most modern and powerful technology and establishes an intimate contact with some of the deepest ideas from science, math, and art in the intellectual model building, which I think is really a concept that we've touched upon in several ways, a model that most people want to aspire to, or at least I do.
Yeah, and one of the challenges we have on my day job, we do a lot of work with schools on project-focused learning, but a lot of the challenge we have in getting kids access to computers is how much they're pre-booked for test prep materials and for giving standardized testing. It just embodies that priority of computer as conveyor of information and tester versus a creation tool.
Agreed, Bob.
Go ahead. Go ahead, Rhonda.
No, I was going. Go ahead, Adder. I'm going to pronounce that name wrong.
So, Adder Abidiji, why don't you take the mic and tell us how to say your name at the same time? The talk button's at the top left of the screen. Oh, he keeps clicking. I can see he keeps clicking on the audio setup wizard. So you're not the button with the red star, but you should see a talk button at the bottom of the audio video box, which should be toward the top left of your screen. Yeah, and again, he's clicking on the audio setup wizard, unfortunately. Okay, so I like, Bob, I like that. And I'll save my next thought. But Alan, go ahead. So Alan, I don't know if you're knowing where to click for talking as well, but it's the talk button. Bob, your mic is still on, I think.
Oh, let me kill it.
That's okay. So Alan, you're looking for the talk button toward the top left of the
Can you hear
screen.
me? Now, can you hear? Now?
Yeah, good.
Hello? Oh, good. Okay. Yeah, it said it wasn't set up for me, so, but anyway, and I don't know if this is extending, but it just...
I clicked the talk button some time ago, but I haven't been quiet for it, so I don't know what...
Can you hear me now? Can you hear Alan?
Oh, we're hearing both of you now.
Oh,
So
I can untalk for a second.
okay, Alan, we'll pause and come back to you. So Adur Ibidji, maybe tell us how to say your name, and then tell us what you'd like to say.
Aderibibe is my name. Aderibibe Adesoji.
Aduribidji.
Can you hear me? Just call me David. Anyhow, David Smith.
We can hear you. Did you have a question or a comment?
Yes, a question.
Go ahead.
My question is, can I get that book we are talking about today?
Where can you get it, did you say?
Yes.
Where are you located?
What do you say? What do you say?
Oh, yeah, I'm asking where you live. Depending on where you live, it may be a book you would need to get from the library.
Lagos in Nigeria.
Right. So you'll have to. It would be very interesting to find out if that book is in Lagos, Nigeria. I would hope it would be. Okay, Alan, let's have you go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me now?
Absolutely.
Okay. So, not necessarily extending off, and I read the book a long time ago, but even from when I first read the book and the original, maybe transitioning to talking about logo and logo language, the language was very mathematical, and there was a lot of just mathematical problem solving and thinking through, and I think like Rhonda was saying, or you were saying, Steve, moving your body, and and for me, I've worked with mostly 3 to 5 year olds, so there was great application in using this with young children, this kind of physically moving through space and this analogous computer language. But then even like 5 or 6 years later, as logo evolved, it evolved almost more into kind of the Mac, and later on with Windows, kind of a graphic interface. And I think if Papert's talking about sort of culture changing, it's sort of the culture changed how that language was being used that he talked about in the book, where now it seemed a little bit less mathematical, although there was still kind of programming sequences that you would go through, but it was through using more of a graphic interface to do it, and you lost some of, I think, what I thought was just some powerful early kind of problem-solving math learning.
Do you think, Alan, that the very thing that Seymour said he thought had happened to Piaget, which is that he was sort of his theories were sort of turned on their head when they were popularized? Do you think the same thing happened with Seymour's work?
Yeah, I can't say what happened with his work. I think the product related to the work, I think succumbed to what was going on in the market. And I think if you look at technology today, it doesn't relate at all to what was being talked about in how computers and how this sort of coding and language. And to me, when you talked about sort of genetic and I was talking about learning as physiological, you know, that earlier working in logo language, it was much more of, I would say, an organic type of a physiological genetic experience and actually probably aligned much more with kind of some basic Piaget theory with, you know, how kids would assimilate information and accommodate within their minds, you know, how to work with this language and how to work with their bodies, at least the younger children, relating to the language.
So would it be fair to say that many of us have a very positive response to the construction side of the argument, to this physiological, to a lot of the things we're talking about now, to this quote that Irina just put up, right, about anachronistic processes that don't actually help learning? I think many of us are comfortable at that level, or at least that level of reading of the book. Am I right in thinking that he challenges us to go beyond that and to go to a place of rethinking how culturally we create learning opportunities, or we specifically look at subject domains in a way to think about how they would be learned rather than taught? Because it feels to me like we go from a place of comfort to maybe even a higher level that I was less sure of how to do. Rhonda, I think you're next, and then we'll go to Ihor and Robin.
And I think that would be very accurate, Steve, because when I read this book, this is my first time reading it, and I couldn't believe that this was, you know, actually written when I was born. Not that I want to age myself. But, for example, you know, on page 184, he talks, the sentence specifically is, in this book, we have seen complex interactions between new technologies and the recasting of subject matters. And I think that's where, you know, back in 1970, I couldn't imagine what it would be like as a professor or a teacher trying to assimilate this subject matter as programming centered as it is into an actual learning society, or you know, a traditional learning culture, if you will, versus the learning society that he's describing. He goes on to say, because I thought this was interesting, going back to Bob's point, and we always seem to get caught up somewhere in the measurement process. And although I'm not trying to win a Nobel Peace Prize, that wouldn't be a bad thing, I guess, if I did. And I think that the next Nobel Peace Prize needs to go to somebody who creates a measurement for education that everybody can like. But it says, when we discuss the use of the computer to facilitate learning, Newton's laws of motion, we did not attempt to computerize the equation as they are found in a classical textbook. We developed a new conceptual framework for thinking about motion. For example, and then he goes on, and that's where he talks about turtle and the ski. He uses an analogy of learning how to ski, but he talks about it being a way to, again, develop mastery, measure, giving quantity. He created somehow a quantitative approach based on, you know, his programming knowledge that could assess how a child learned on their own, you know, through their own hands-on kinesthetic bodily interaction, able to problem solve. And I think that was profound at the time. I couldn't even imagine teaching it now. I don't know.
So we'll go to Ihor in a second. So he talks about skiing, right, Rhonda? He talks about how there was this sort of dramatic change in both the understanding of skiing and the learning and the technique and the materials. And largely that happened just sort of coincidentally as all those factors came together. And another example he gives is the movie industry and all of the communities that built up around that. But I left those two examples feeling as though, okay, those weren't really things that people set out to do. They were complex interactions that reflected change. So if we're going to see complex interactions reflected in change in learning, is there really anything we're supposed to do, or should we just be watching? And I'll leave that question hanging, and Ihor, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I just turned on my mic. Is my mic working?
We hear you.
Good. Okay. You can give me feedback. Okay, great. I feel like I've wandered into a familiar territory, but doesn't seem like anyone else has had my experience. I am going to date myself because I was sitting in Teachers College back in 1980 in the auditorium when I first heard Seymour Papert speak, and it changed my life because for the first time in my life I saw that what math education was not about what I was doing right now, but it was about getting kids to really enjoy mathematics, get them to love mathematics. So that kind of thing that he mentioned in the book somewhere about falling in love with mathematics struck home with me, and I think it struck home with a lot of other people who were involved in mathematics. But it certainly it was very heady times in the Logo community. At that time, I happened to have worked for Logo Computer Systems for a couple of years, and I thought I had my dream job. And unfortunately, when Logo Writer came out, it flopped, and I was laid off. But I've been a big Logo fan. Seymour's one of my heroes. And I wish Gary Steger was here because he's the one that talks about him all the time and has the daily Papert that he does. He quotes Papert all the time. So anyway, I'm very much involved and think about all these issues. For me, microworlds were very critical because it was an idea that it said that we have this environment, a technology environment that allows us to create wonderful objects to have kids interact with. And they don't have to be on the computer, but there's always been a technological connection. Whether it's Scratch today is the current Logo. The other thought, I'm just having rambling thoughts now, is that if you've read Mindstorms or thinking about it, I would highly recommend the Connected Family, which is his latest, not that recent, but the last book he wrote, which actually captured what we're doing today. In other words, what's going on with the internet and Web 2.0 is he was alluding to that, modeling it. He was right there. Just such a shame we can't hear him anymore, but he certainly is the guy that brought that all out in me.
Thanks, Ihor. That's a fun set of connections. Robin?
Yeah, I wanted to go back to the idea of change and learning and jump up to the children's machine, which in a lot of ways I think I'd actually kind of forgotten. I'd read a long time ago Mindscapes. I will date myself. I'm 67. At any rate, in the children's machine, Papert said that for the first time in human history, children will have access to information and won't need to go to adults. And I think this is where the change I see, I'm still teaching, is coming from, because children are doing so much learning on their own, and they understand that they're learning on their own. And in particular, what I see is children finally starting to question at an undergraduate college level why they should have to sit and listen to long lectures when they can go get this information on their own. I also see it, I see it way down. I see it with fourth graders, third graders who don't want to learn their multiplication tables because kids are questioning things in a way that my generation did not question until we got to college. And I think this is forcing some changes. There is a socioeconomic divide here because definitely lower socioeconomic children don't have this opportunity.
That's a really interesting perspective, and we've talked about this a little on the Future of Education show, Robin, because there's a degree to which mobile technology has enabled students to connect with each other outside of adult supervision, which I think has an impact here.
Yes, I agree. I don't think we know quite what to do with it.
Right. Well, the question is, are we creating the right circumstances for learning, or are the devices that we've created, are they entertainment machines rather than actually reaching this goal that Seymour had of creating a cultural changes that would lead to more profound learning? And Rhonda, you're next. Go ahead.
I was listening, so I lost my train of thought for a second. I agree. I think there's kind of a twofold process that's unfolding, and I don't think either was prepared, nor is it really clear to see how or what way to handle it. Technology in the hands of a younger audience, more often unsupervised than supervised, creates by and of itself learning of some kind. Now, what's being learned, we wouldn't know because it's unsupervised, but something is occurring, and that plays out more significantly in most populations, at least in the developed cultures, than not. And in the past, even when I grew up, and although I may be young, I didn't have, for example, a cell phone at my disposal. We learned through what we did outside, and we played, and we created things and so forth. Where now that opportunity for younger students isn't as vast as it was then. In some places in the country it may still be, but not in the big cities or in urban areas for sure. That's number one. And number two is that teachers are kind of stuck in a place of trying to be guides or trying to help facilitate, what's going on with technology, and maybe still, underprepared or underserved. Teachers, by all means, underserved in being able to keep up with the diversity of technology because of its pace, because of its, span, because of the diversity of which they don't really have control over choosing what technology is being used, all of those attributes. So with both of those things going on, it would be difficult to have a clear, model or framework that was able to capture capture the majority of attributes that are affecting the actual learning that a child is receiving. Does that make sense?
Rhonda and the rest of you, do you think that we come at this from a skewed perspective, being involved in education and caring about learning, and that Seymour came from that same perspective, that there was this assumption that we would care enough about learning to make cultural changes, to rethink how we worked in disciplines in order to make them learning friendly? Do you think that's an assumption that gets kind of buried underneath the commercialization and the entertainment value of the technologies? And I don't know if anybody wants to respond to that specifically, but feel free to put it in the chat or raise your hand, and we'll go to Aderibiji again from Lagos, Nigeria.
Thank you. I think that should not erode the importance of computer in learning. But I think to an extent this have to be regulated, and this you could do through kind of monitoring of children, kind of setting a firewall to debar the child from accessing unnecessary sites, because one of the fear is that if the child is left all alone, it may come to a stage that such a child will not learn particular things which is or she is supposed to learn, and this may just make him to go elsewhere to look for information that are not actually necessary, or even watching pornography. And these have to be regulated, and also, and all these information communication gadgets sometimes take time of the students, and if such is not being restricted, they may find it as I noticed that in my class, that sometimes when you are teaching, another child is doing another thing on phone, pinging and other stuff, which has characterized the activities of students of nowadays. And this has to be restricted if the purpose of the telecommunication gadgets will be achieved. Thank you.
I think those are really interesting points, and I'm wondering if the desire to filter or to control students' use of technology ends up being a red herring. Irina, you have the mic.
Hi, Steve. Thanks for that. Yes, I put up two little sentences that kind of struck me, that they were ones that actually my husband had highlighted in this rather ancient copy of Seymour's book, and I was interested in exploring, you know, first of all, you know, why all those years ago maybe my husband thought they were worthwhile passages to run his yellow highlighter over. I think particularly the last one, which is about, because he was a teacher of mathematics, actually maths method, and I'm imagining that he might have been very attracted to the passage about getting the children in elementary school to learn programming. I mean, remembering this was back in the late 70s that he would have written all of this. And there's been some various attempts over the years here in Australia to, in fact, get children to learn programming at quite a young age, to get them interested in mathematics, but also so that they actually understand what, you know, computers are all about. And that children get terribly engaged, and they actually get it because programming is actually a language, and they can get what somebody was saying, this notion, I'm just trying to find the exact words that they used, of sort of lighting their fire. I'm just trying to find where yeah, the falling in love with maths, you know, that you know, I mean, I've seen iPads get children to fall in love with reading. You know, this notion of getting children to actually develop a passion for something, I think Seymour saw this back in, you know, the late 70s, early 80s, long before other people saw it. And I think that's what's so exciting about this book, that it actually does talk about igniting a passion in people, using technology, something we don't talk about very much. I find that a bit sad. I actually just in concluding, I did have the privilege of meeting Seymour Papert in person at a COSM conference in Washington quite a few years ago. He really is quite an extraordinary man. Thanks for the opportunity to come to the mic.
Thanks, Irina. I'm curious, for those of you who are here, did any of you in reading the book think, I'm interested that he wasn't referring to other work being done in exactly the areas Irina was talking about? I mean, there were other people talking about, like John Holt, right, who were talking about different ways of thinking about learning. There was, I mean, he does seem to call into question whether or not schools will exist, and there were other people asking those same questions. Were there ways in which Ihor or Irina or others that you feel as though there were complementary messages that didn't get brought into the book? We'll let you go again if you'd like.
Yeah, I was just kind of
sorry.
leaving it to see if somebody wanted to take a mic and answer that question.
Go ahead. You
I'm
go
sure,
first, and I'll go second.
Okay, okay, Ihor. again, I think I think what Eileen just said, again, going back to creating a passion for learning, falling in love with learning was really the central theme that I took away from his passion for writing. So whatever may have been going on in the surrounding scholarly discussions, he seemed focused on being able to ignite, as Eileen said, or Irene said, excuse me, the passion within the child's natural desire to problem solve or to learn. And I think his discussion about pairing and turtles is a great way to kind of how he, for me at least, was able to simplify that expression by saying the people knowledge part that he saw was necessary to the design of that was necessary to the design of good, and I may mess this name up, but Pagetian material is itself complex, and it includes the kinds of knowledge that are associated with academic psychology in all of its branches, and also the more empathetic kinds possessed by creative artists and by people who get along with children. And he goes on to call those prerequisites for learning. And it goes back to that same point we made at the beginning, which is, you know, the learning culture, the learning society, being in love with learning how to learn. And for me, he was just, and again, as most people are that are brilliant, way ahead of his time, and probably considered, you know, something that people couldn't grasp, I would imagine.
Ihor?
I was trying to clarify what you said about complementary learning. What were those two again? Because now I've lost my train of thought on that.
Well, I was interested. I mean, there were other voices at the time who were talking about
John Holt.
students, but yeah, like John Holt. I mean, I don't know what Ivan Illich's timing was, but I don't think he was the only person sort of discovering the child's natural passion for learning. And so I was curious in reading the book. I didn't see a lot of references. There certainly was, I think, only one reference to Dewey. There weren't any to Holt. So I was wondering, did he feel like that he was on a parallel track, do you think? Do you think he felt like, or maybe he just wasn't as aware of the other people writing at the time?
I think he was aware. I think he just had a different kind of message, and it was very much technology-oriented, because he really believed that this machine, which he thought about as being this all-powerful machine that's going to change the world, would influence people. But mostly it's about getting people to engage in the world in a way where they're engaged with learning and there's a passion involved. Okay, that's what he was trying to drive home all the time. And when we talk about constructionists, it's like when Gary Stager starts yelling and saying, give kids the tools to play with and have them enjoy the experience of building things. That's really the heart of the matter, and that's really what constructionist thinking is all about. Now, as far as other thinkers, he was a student of Piaget, and he studied with Piaget, so he certainly was interested in it. But what changed his mind is when he looked into the classrooms and saw that there wasn't very little learning. Like, for example, when the first time the NCTM standards came out, he was quoted saying that they're starting to go on the right track, but they're terribly conservative. You know, they're not really going after. And it's, to this day, those Common Core standards are still in a dreary place because they're not after what Papert was really thinking about.
Ihor, why is Gary's organization called the Constructivist Consortium? If he was a constructionist.
Constructivist or you know what? I'm not clear now. Really? Isn't it constructionist knowledge? It's not constructivist, it's constructionist.
I think it's the Constructivist Consortium. Gary's the executive director.
Yes, yeah, so I know I'm planning to be there this summer. for the first time.
Wonder what, I can't remember what the event is called, but his organization is.
No, you're right.
Constructivist
You're right.
Consortium.
That is interesting. I don't know. I don't. You know, I've been. He talks about constructionism so much that I never even noticed.
Okay, so I don't know how the rest of you feel. This was a huge experiment, right? Playing with having an online meeting and having the virtual book club. This has been valuable to me. I don't know that in an hour we could have any higher expectations than that. Here's what I would challenge you to do. If you're still interested in holding the discussion about Mindstorms, go to the Mighty Bell space, and I'll put the chat, I'll put the link back in the chat. And if there's a desire to hold another actual live event, I'm really glad to do so. I'm not sure if people will want to, or if they'll want to do ones, with that are sort of specific to certain messages in the book. But I'm really open to that. And let me know what you think. Let me know what you think of how this went. Let me know what you think of the Mighty Bell space. And here's the link to that again, I'm putting in the chat. The next book, I believe, is Democracy and Education, or Education and Experience, the John Dewey book. If you go to Book Club 2.0, yeah, I want to know more about the Connected Family. I have not read that. Here's Book Club 2.0. The idea is, in the course of a year or two, to get through some of these books and then have a recorded legacy around them, so someone could read them later and then dive into the material as well. So anyway, thanks for coming. Can't wait to get more feedback. We'll keep trying and seeing how we do. Really appreciate your taking the time. I know that time is valuable, and this was fun for me. And this actually really helped me. Just preparing helped me to treat the book differently and to go through my own different mental processes. Okay, we're going to close off now, only because I have another event. Take care, everybody. Bye.